Renewing the Mind. Today on Living in Christ with Bob Hoekstra. Welcome to Living in Christ with Pastor Bob Hoekstra. We begin today's program by revisiting a question: who are we in Christ? As believers, we derive our identity from our relationship with the Lord, as revealed in His Word. It's one of the key ingredients to being an effective counselor, knowing our identity in Christ. Pastor Bob moves on now to show us how the renewing of the mind applies to counseling God's way.
The renewing of the mind. Ephesians 4:17 and 18 tells us why we need our minds renewed. It speaks of our minds before we came to Christ, uses terms like futility of the mind, darkened understanding, ignorance, blindness, and hardness. By the way, that's another reason I have no interest in the psychological theories of man. They came out of minds that were futile, darkened, spiritually ignorant, blind, and hard. No, thank you. We'll go elsewhere for our input. Yes, we need our minds renewed desperately because in Adam, our minds were a mess. Ephesians 4:23 calls us to be renewed in the spirit of our minds. You might say in our overall mindset or perspective, from hard to soft, from self-sufficient to Christ-seeking, from proud to humble, just overall mindset changed. But there's another place we want to spend a little time on. That's Romans 12, which speaks more comprehensively and extensively about the renewing of the mind. Romans 12:1 and 2 does not speak of just the spirit or mindset being renewed, but just more general, the mind, all of it, every aspect of it. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. We're called to not be conformed to this world. Or, I think it was J.B. Phillips in his translation put it, don't let the world squeeze you into its mold. The world doesn't like us thinking differently than them. We're a convicting presence to them, a reminder they need God. They're walking in rebellion and self-service. The world has its pressure. People talk about peer pressure. You talk about teenagers, oh yeah, peer pressure. As though only teens succumb to peer pressure. You know when peer pressure is a danger? Whenever you have peers. It doesn't matter what age you are. Peer pressure is always a danger. In the whole world, there are peers, with many out there our age and all, and even walking in areas like we are in business or family and all, and they want to pressure us into their way of thinking and perceiving life and developing life. We're not to be conformed to this world, to man's ways. By the way, just that one caution, that one single caution, do not be conformed to this world, ought to check, hold off, stop the church from its quest to somehow integrate all the possible aspects of psychological theory they can get in their systems of teaching, preaching, and counseling. We're not to be conformed to this world, to man's ways of thinking, but we're to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Transformed. Lives really changed. Transformation. Not conforming to some external pressure, but literally being transformed. A real change of life. Newness of life coming forth. How does that happen? By the renewing of your mind. Transformation comes from the renewing of our minds. That is, learning to think more and more like God thinks and God perceives and God describes and God reveals in area after area of life. The renewing of the mind. A question. Do you know Christians, maybe friends, relatives, loved ones, neighbors, church members, whose lives are not being transformed? They talk and function, behave, much like they did before they came to Christ. Maybe we had a season like that. Why is it that some Christian lives just don't get transformed, and they even go from counselor to counselor to counselor to counselor, and transformation does not take place? I think we're told right here what is generally the problem. Their minds are not being renewed, because we're called to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. If our minds are being renewed, our lives will be in the process of transformation. I mean, think about it. Why are we spending all day on this beautiful Southern California day inside a building in Bible study? We lost our minds. No, we found our minds. Think of the things you used to do on a Saturday. I mean, generally years ago on a Saturday, I'd have been trying to recover from the previous all-night poker game, and I'd be staggering out like a fool at 4 a.m. out on some golf course, getting in line if somebody cancels so I can play golf because I was too dumb to make a reservation. Then come home and collapse and start the whole process over again. And if somebody told me there are people doing this, like, pathetic. They could be out here living like me. I mean, now, I don't know any way I'd rather spend an afternoon less just hanging out with my dear wife. But God doesn't seem to make Saturdays a day we do that. So this is great. To most of us, hey, this is wonderful. What's happened? Our minds have been renewed, and the very way we live and invest our time is being transformed. Another question. Why aren't more Christians having their minds renewed? Because the renewing of the mind takes place with lives that are in the spiritual place and position described in verse 1. The condition that precedes the transformation. Where's that? On the altar of God. Present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable to God. The renewing of the mind, which leads to transformed lives, only happens in lives given to God, as described in verse 1, on His altar. Why? Christian lives that are not lived from the altar of God, you know what they're lived for? Self. And even if they aren't lived for self and its fleshy resources, even if we try to live for God, it's from self and fleshly resources. It's lives on the altar of God that really get their minds renewed. Why? When we see that our lives are not our own, 1 Corinthians 6, we've been bought with a price. We see, oh Lord, what am I doing? Everybody's been telling me take charge of my life, and like a fool I've been trying to. You know? Forgive me. I want to just lay my life on the altar. It's yours, Lord. You redeemed me. You paid for it. Why am I acting like it's my life? I just lay my life on your altar. Those whose lives are on the altar of God, for life to be a living sacrifice, not a dead sacrifice like the animals of the Old Covenant, burned, poof, gone, but we stay there on the altar, a sacrifice living unto God. Our life, the sacrifice, right there on the altar of God. Any Christian whose life is on the altar of God, they want to hear from the Lord. Hey, Lord, it's your life. What do you want to do with it? They're in the Word. They want to hear. They're getting the mind of Christ. 1 Corinthians 2:16. They want the Lord to manage their affairs and be in charge. So they're hearing from the Lord all the time. and his ways and values and perspectives and thinking is becoming their thinking. So their minds are being renewed and their lives are being transformed. Let me ask another question. Keep pushing this back. Why don't more Christians lay their lives on the altar of God? And it might seem like we're going kind of laboriously, carefully through this passage, but I'll tell you, Romans 12:1 and 2, I've found through the years as one of the strategic key passages in all the New Testament for counseling God's way. It gets so foundationally to the bottom of issues. It gets with such centrality to the heart of it all. Can't tell you the times God has brought me here to share with someone who's not finding transforming change in their Christian walk. So why don't more Christians lay their lives on the altar of God? That's probably in the text here too. Perhaps because they've never considered the motivation that leads you as a Christian to lay life on the altar of God.
This is Living in Christ, and we just aired a part of Bob Hoekstra's 6-part seminar called Counseling God's Way. It's available in multiple formats. Request it on DVD or CD. Pastor Bob has also written a book on the subject called How to Counsel God's Way, and in it he covers much of the same material. The gulf between man's way of counseling and God's way of counseling are ever widening. And Bob's book, How to Counsel God's Way, goes into great depth to explain you can be an effective counselor by relying on God and His Word to be your guide. You can order by phone at 877-600-LICM. Again, call 877-600-5426, and we can help you with the ordering details. Or utilize our e-store, where it's super easy to order resources like this. We're on the web at livinginchrist.org. By the way, it's available as an ebook as well. Get it on iBooks or Amazon Kindle. We also have a media library which contains many of Bob's biblical studies and can be downloaded with ease. You can also listen to our programs there too. That's livinginchrist.org. Stay connected with us by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Follow us at COL128 on Facebook and Twitter, and COL_128 on Instagram. Join us next time as we continue to learn the necessary steps to counseling God's way. You're on Living in Christ with Pastor Bob Hoekstra.